And today we're going to make sourdough bread. This is a basic sourdough recipe that is pretty foolproof, although in the past I have managed to find ways to mess it up. But always that was because of a starter that was not active enough. So I'll talk a bit about starters, but I'll have a separate video on getting your sourdough starter started. So sourdough bread is made simply from flour and water and salt. You would think, wow, what can you make that's tasty out of flour and water and salt? And the surprising thing about sourdough bread is it is amazingly tasty. And today I want to show you how to do it and give you confidence that you can do it. All right, so it's now about 6 p.m. This is after 2 feedings, one in the morning and one about maybe 3 in the afternoon or so, 3 or 4. And I don't know if you can see that too good, but it's quite bubbly. It's risen up higher than it was, so it tells me it's really active. So now it's time to mix the dough. A wood spoon or a rubber scraper is good for mixing. And I'm showing you the mixing of the dough here uncut and in real time so that you can get a sense for how long it takes to mix this. And what you'll see is it's not a very long process. What you're trying to accomplish is to just make sure that there are no dry pockets of flour anywhere. And so I'm scraping the sides, I'm doing a turning and lifting motion with the dough to bring the bottom parts up towards the top. And just continue to go around the bowl, scraping, lifting, pushing down. You'll find at the very bottom of the bowl is where the dry flour tends to kind of hide. So you'll want to concentrate on getting that flour picked up and moved up into the dough. But just keep going around and around, lift, push down, turn, lift, push down, turn. And eventually you'll see that no dry flour remains. And at that point, you're basically done. Now, this can all be done with your bare hands if you like playing in dough. I prefer to use a tool, but you're free to have fun with your bare hands. As far as kneading goes, some people would knead the dough after they've first mixed it like this. which you can do, and there's nothing wrong with kneading, but I've found it really is not necessary. I haven't found any advantage to kneading the dough, and so I don't do it. So there you go. There's the dough after mixing. You can see how shaggy it is at this point. But it will become smoother, and you'll see how we make the dough smoother in just a moment. Once you've mixed the dough, cover it with some plastic wrap and just set your bowl of dough on your counter somewhere. And right now we're going to let it rest for about 30 minutes. And now we're going to begin to work the dough to increase the elasticity and the strength of the dough. What we do is we simply pull the dough up, hold it with one hand, and pull it up with the other hand about as far as you can pull it up before the dough would break off, and then just fold it back down on the lump of dough and go around, rotate the bowl a little bit, go around and around, keep stretching and folding. And once you've gone around maybe twice, sometimes I'll turn the lump of dough over after that and then recover it with your plastic wrap. And now you're going to let it rest another 30 minutes, and you're going to do this operation every 30 minutes. I recommend 3 or 4 sets, no fewer than 2 sets, but the more the better. Once you've finished all the stretching and folding, you're simply going to cover the dough again with plastic wrap and let it rise until it's approximately doubled in volume. Okay, so it's the next morning now, and you can see that the dough has risen. It's probably about doubled in volume. So next step is we're going to turn it out onto a floured work surface. We'll pre-shape it first and let it rest, and then we'll put it in a banneton, which is a little basket for the final rising before baking. Alright, so we're just going to turn this dough out onto the board that I've floured here. Usually have to encourage it a little bit, but it usually comes out fairly clean. Just don't rush it, take your time and let it kind of fall out. Okay. So there it is. You can see how much volume it's increased to. So normally what I'll do now is pre-shape the loaf and just basically fold it in a few places kind of to the center. And then flip it over. And then if you use your hands on the side like this, you can kind of get it into a nice shape. Now these bubbles here, you can either pop them if you don't like big bubbles in your bread, or you just leave them. It's up to you. But I'm going to cover this now and just let it rest probably for half an hour, and then we'll get to the final shaping step. Alright, the dough has been resting now. You can see it's even risen a bit more than it was before. So now we're going to do the final shaping of the loaf and put it into a banneton. This is called a banneton. It's like a wicker basket with a cloth lining specially made for bread. And we're going to put the loaf in that for the final rise. Now, what I've found the best for preventing the loaf from sticking to the cloth is to use cornstarch. you'll see some people recommend flour, but I found flour actually kind of like a glue that makes it stick to the cloth. And then it's not very much fun when you're trying to get the loaf out of your proofing basket. So I use cornstarch, and it never sticks. So for the final shaping, we're going to turn the loaf back over. You can see how much liveliness it has. It's just really full of so many air pockets. It's going to make our loaf really nice. So final shaping is basically like the first one. And the way I do it is I just simply bring the edges of the dough together. And then with these circular motions, you're kind of getting a little flour on my hands here. You're kind of getting the loaf to get tighter. You want the top skin of the loaf to get tight. So there's one of those bubbles. I don't really like a lot of bubbles, so I'm going to pop it so that I don't have a giant hole in my loaf. But some people like those, so if you do, feel free to use that. Okay, so now we're simply going to scoop up the dough and flop it into our banneton. There it is. And then I cover it with plastic wrap. And then I usually just put something else over it, but you don't have to. Okay, so this is going to rise now for probably another hour. And what I want to see is I want to see the loaf come up basically to the top of the banneton. That's my goal. And this has got a lot of life in it still, so it will definitely rise up. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to get my oven preheating in just a little bit, and then we're going to bake. All right, so we're going to get ready to bake bread. And for sourdough, your best tool that's really going to make your bread come out nice is a cast iron Dutch oven. I have one here from Stobe, which is good. It's got a non-stick coating, but any cast iron Dutch oven is fine. And we're going to preheat the Dutch oven in the oven as the oven's preheating so that it becomes very hot before we put the loaf into it. And this is going to help with the oven spring, get the loaf to rise in the oven. And it'll be covered initially during baking. And then after 20 minutes of baking, we will remove the lid for the remainder of the time. All right, so we're ready now to bake the loaf. And the tools we're going to need for this, some baking paper, parchment, a small enough piece to help me to lower this loaf down into the preheated Dutch oven. And then something to score the loaf with. You can use an X-Acto knife, razor blade, maybe a very sharp knife might work, or you can get one of these tools made for bread scoring. It's called a lame, which means blade in French. And that's what I use. It was very cheap. And so here's our loaf. Now the top of the loaf has come up even with the top of the basket, which was about what I was looking for. So what I'm going to do is simply lay the piece of parchment over the basket and then flip it over. And you see how easily it came off because of that cornstarch. Now you can leave all the cornstarch on there or brush it off. It doesn't matter. So scoring, there's many patterns we can use. They're just limited by your imagination. I've experimented with a lot of different things. For this one, I'm just going to do a simple X. So we're just going to start and score maybe about 1/4 inch deep, just straight across. You see how the loaf starts to open up. And then we're going to go across. But going across, start at the slit you just made and go down one side, and the slit you made here and go down the other side. And then you can kind of open it up a bit more if you'd like. But that's it. That'll be a real simple scoring pattern that we're going to use. Now I'm going to pull my Dutch oven out of the oven, and we're going to put the loaf in there. Alright, so I've got my Dutch oven here. Here we can move the camera a little bit. There it is. It's super hot, so be very careful. And then I'm just going to lower this right down in there. There it is. Put the lid on. And we're going to pop that in the oven. The oven I had preheated to 450 degrees. All right, 20 minutes have elapsed, and we're going to remove the lid here carefully. Ooh, look how that's risen. Nice. And another 45 minutes approximately. All right, so the loaf baked for another 45 minutes. And be very careful. The Dutch oven is going to be super hot. But usually the parchment's not too brittle, and you can lift it out with the parchment. So that was good. Get this out of the way. And just going to put it on a cooling rack. So the bread is... oh, look at that. That's beautiful. See how it opened up really nicely. That cornstarch that we used in the basket gives it a nice appearance. I like that. Now you'll notice the crust is pretty dark. And if you're not used to sourdough, you would think, well, it looks burned. But actually, the darker you get the crust of sourdough, the more flavor you bring out. So it really is nice. So that's it. It's just going to sit on the counter to cool. Don't try to slice it for at least 2 hours, because it'll be gummy if you try to slice it too soon. So we have our loaf, and obviously there are many ways you could slice a loaf of bread like this. You could just start at one end and slice off a heel. Well, I don't want to eat that, but then I'll slice another piece, and then you just continually slice it from one end to the other as you use it. That is one way to do it. I've found that there's a better way, at least for me, what works better is slice it right down the middle. So we're going to take our bread and we're just going to slice it straight down the middle, turn it on its side, and hold it firmly and kind of do it at arm's length. Get your arms extended. And now we can see the crumb that we have in this bread. That's really nice. It's a pretty open crumb, meaning there's a lot of air pockets, but there's no giant bubbles here. The one that I popped, you can see that it's not there anymore. This is the way I like it. So when you make it for toast, you know, your butter's not going to be seeping through a lot of holes. So it works for me. All right, so once you've sliced it down the middle, basically what I'm going to do is, because I am the only bread eater in the house, Sai doesn't really eat a lot of bread. And so I find one loaf will last me for about a week. So I make one of these loaves a week, more or less. So what I do is I take one half that I've sliced, and I immediately wrap it in plastic wrap and put it in a Ziploc freezer bag and put it in the freezer. The other half is what I'm going to eat on for the first, well, 3 days, let's say, 3 or 4 days. And to keep a piece of bread like this, the best way to store it is in a clean linen kitchen towel, okay? And so you can just wrap it in the towel, wrap it up good, and then put that into a paper bag. I got an old paper bag here. I've reused this thing 100 times probably. So I just will insert that into the paper bag, kind of roll down the top, put a clip on it, and then I just store this in the kitchen, on the counter or wherever out of the way. And it stays pretty fresh. When I want to use some bread, I'll take it out, and then for my first use, I'm going to slice it. I'm not going to slice it right now because I don't want to eat it right now. But I'll just take this half and slice it into 2 halves to make quarters. And then from each quarter, begin slicing your slices. And you start using it up like that. And that works out well for me. It keeps it fresh, longer than any method I've tried so far. In terms of using a sourdough bread like this, generally the first day or 2 after you've made it is when the bread is really nice to eat fresh. So in other words, just a slice with some butter or some jam or peanut butter on it or something like that. After about 2 days, it begins to dry out more and it's not as nice fresh. That's when you'll start using it more for toast. And French toast, by the way, this bread makes the best French toast I've ever had. It's just out of this world. And maybe I'll do a video on the French toast one day soon. Anyway, so that's slicing your bread, storing your bread. And I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm going to put the recipe at the end of this video. There'll be a slide that has the recipe. And I'll also put it in the comments so that you can hopefully try it. And if anybody actually tries this, please comment and let me know how it goes. All right. Thanks for watching.